Hi, I'm Mike Brofman, and welcome to the season finale of Song and Wine, where I talk with members of the Brooklyn Art Song Society about art song, and we drink wine. Today we have ice in our wine, because it's still warm, because we didn't organize this soon enough. I'm joined today by our first commissioned composer, Marie Incontrera.
Hi.
We are going to discuss our upcoming concert, which is our season finale concert, which will be on May 21st at Galapagos Art Space. It is the world premiere of a fantastic piece, a song cycle entitled Quagmires and the Known Knowns. 16 songs, and they're all texts from political speeches and government documents surrounding 9/11 and the Iraq War. I just read that off the subtitle. So we're going to talk a little bit about this piece because it's really exciting. So why don't we talk a little bit first about the origins of Quagmires. That's our nickname for it. And sometimes we call it Quaggy, which that's our pet name.
Well, Quaggy, I love that. Well, I love writing political music, and Quagmires was kind of a, in talking about what I would write for Brooklyn Art Song Society, I really wanted to write something political and something that meant something, and this is such a major point in our history, and I feel like it needed to be put to music.
Yeah, I think that there's enough. I mean, with the Iraq War sort of ending, now it's sort of like there's a sense in American history that, especially with Barack Obama, that one era has sort of ended. The first chapter of the 21st century has ended, and there's enough sort of breathing room to sort of look back on it. And yeah, I think we sort of came up with the idea a little bit together. I forget exactly how, but we were talking about exactly what we'd write. And I kind of always wanted something like this, something sort of overtly political, something with, and something particularly with the Iraq War. Yeah. And so it just seemed like it was a natural fit. Well,
we had started talking, I think, right after the war had ended. Not after the war had ended, but right after the death of Osama bin Laden.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was kind of fresh in everybody's minds, and so it just kind of became this organic thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these speeches, I mean, if you're looking at it, the dates of them, I mean, this was composed in 2012, for the most part, and, when was Osama bin Laden killed? Earlier that year.
Yeah.
So these are very, some of these texts, some of them are very old, some of them are older. But, so let's talk a little bit about, it's a very interesting sort of map of the piece. It's in 3 large sections. And how would you describe each of the sections? What is, either musically or thematically, text-wise, what's the point of each section?
Well, it kind of goes chronologically. The first section is the Valley of the Shadow of Death, and which is
the psalm.
Right.
The Psalm 23, right?
Right.
Which is one of the songs.
Yeah. Well, Bush used it in his speech when he first announced that the towers had been hit and the Pentagon had been hit, and I really liked the text. Partly because Gangster's Paradise was around when I was younger, but also because it was really just very haunting, and I wanted something haunting because there was so much that surrounded that, and there was so much fault from all these sides and everything, and so it starts out with Bush's speech, and then it goes into the Psalm 23, and it sort of continues in that vein.
Yeah, I feel like the whole first section is almost context for the rest of it. There's that one from the Marquis de Lafayette. That's actually from the Revolutionary War. Our Revolutionary War, and the text is, "We're not to expect democracy to come on a feather bed." Right. That might be literal.
We are not to expect to be translated from despotism into liberty in a feather bed.
Yeah. And that's sort of foreshadowing our, the Iraq War and the, sort of the idea of a war for liberation.
Right.
The sort of underscoring the naivete of the Bush administration, that they were just going to go and be greeted as liberators.
Yeah.
And it's sort of kind of foreboding. And then there's also just sort of the text, that last song of it's a duet, the spreading,
right,
is a sort of hoax. It's sort of about this sort of overcoming of sort of fear and paranoia and
right.
Islamophobia that was immediately around 9/11.
Yeah, for that one there was a quote that was supposedly from the Quran about the wrath of an eagle hitting, avenging the land of Allah,
yeah.
which was, of course, alluding to what happened on 9/11, but it actually wasn't in the Quran, and it sort of was this, internet hotbed, and people got really paranoid, and it really spread this Islamophobia. And I felt like that was a good way to segue into the next, the second.
This is my favorite title of a section. tell them what part 2 is called.
Bush lies, Saddam dies.
It rhymes too.
Yeah.
I might have come up with that. I might need to take credit for that.
Who did come up with that? I don't know.
We kind of mutually.
Yeah.
I guess it's interesting when we came up with the order for this together. The songs were not written in an order. They were written just sort of as they came to the musical material. And then after the fact,
we set it up.
And we were sort of bracing for it to be like this big challenge of like, how are you going to put all these songs in the right order? But then we sort of saw that there was just this sort of natural order.
Yeah.
It was so logical that it almost seemed as like you might as well have written it.
Right.
I remember Aaron Copland in his Piano Variations, which is a great piece. He said he claims that he did not write the variations in order. He wrote just a bunch of variations and then figured out an order that made sense. But when you listen to the piece, it's so organic. I mean, I couldn't imagine. Well, until we did this, it's like I couldn't imagine him having written, the amount of order, and then just it magically fits together. But now, actually, I see how it's kind of possible to do that.
Yeah, this is actually the first time I ever worked that way, because I usually work fairly linearly, and this was, I think I started with 2 of the later songs, and then after that I started to work backward, and then I sort of jumped around. Yeah. So it's interesting. It kind of was like an anomaly in my work to do it that way. And then we did it in like a half hour.
And then we got hot wings.
That's right. That was right before the New Year.
Yeah.
It was,
So part 2 is Bush lies, Saddam dies, and there are 2. I think this is the songs that are the meat about that really directly concern the Iraq War.
Right.
And but also it introduces my favorite string of songs, which is the Bushisms.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's funny because it's kind of this dichotomy, because it kind of needed, it was so heavy, there's so much heavy
it's like the darkest, it's by far the darkest, there's the charmingly titled Professional Rapist.
Right. There's no getting around the content in that part. I feel like, sections 1 and 3 are much less explicit. And then, there's the Professional Rapist. There's the translation of the text from Saddam's actual hanging, which was incredibly difficult to work with. It was upsetting and really just...
And that's actually interesting because you have in the song, it was literally, it's not just like a poem or a speech that someone wrote down. It's literally what was said in the moment. And apparently there's a prayer you're supposed to say 3 times before. Is it before you die? Or
before you're executed.
Before you're executed, and they only let Saddam say it twice.
Right.
And so it gets cut off. And in the music, it literally gets cut off mid-sentence. And that's kind of, if you think about it, most texts that Art Song is set to are, they're not like living and breathing that way. They're like, they're not about a specific, but they're like written down and they're, they're sort of permanently on paper.
Yeah.
And but this was interesting. It's almost operatic in the way to have like something actually happening, something about how the text was said that is so like part of it.
Yeah, well, I grappled with that one for months, because I found the transcription, and it was so disturbing because it wasn't a state-sanctioned execution. It was very much under the table. And when I found the transcription, and there was the Arabic prayers were really beautiful. They're really quite poetic and everything, and it was just so tragic. I felt of course Saddam was who he was, and he was a terrible leader and everything, but at the same time it was just so sad to see someone go that way, to hear someone go that way.
Yeah, and it's weird actually. The most beautiful language just in all of the songs, the most poetic, and we'll kind of talk about this later, is Saddam's words.
Yeah.
His is the most, and it's like he's the most evil of all the evil people in this cycle. But his, and it has maybe has something to do with Arabic being a more poetic language, or just the context of it, and it's almost, you get this very ambivalent feeling about the words itself being versus the Bushisms, which are so they're basically all the famous stupid things Bush said. And so it's like his sort of clumsy, clunky language versus that, and it's almost like it's kind of jarring that how much that language just if it was not somewhat an evil dictator saying it in some poet, it would be very moving.
The song before the execution one is I Offer Myself in Sacrifice, and it was basically Saddam's open letter to Iraq before he was killed, and anybody could have written it. It was just so beautiful. It was very accepting of death, very sort of this very poetic and beautiful way of looking at life, and it's true. Anybody could have written it, and you look at it and you go, oh wow, and then you sort of sympathize for a second before you remember, and it's just I wanted to set those because I wanted some objectivity to looking at some really awful people.
There is a certain sense of sort of like an odd humanity to Saddam Hussein, and that almost like. And it is sort of, I always say, like, thinking about sort of, I think the thing that about sort of tyrants and dictators is that they sort of spend their whole life, the tragedy of it, they spend their whole life basically trying to make themselves immortal, trying to make them either idols and build statues of themselves, or just sort of acting like the biggest, strongest man who is invincible. And then they just end up dying just like everyone else, and it's so much worse for them. It's almost that sort of tragic, almost like Shakespearean tragic quality that they get, not to aggrandize on them. And then the last section sort of segues a little bit, is called Speak Out, which is sort of it's a quote from the Winter Soldier investigation, but it's not a full quote, it's just sort of, we had to speak out. And that, I guess, we do end pretty optimistically, I think, or the piece ends optimistically. And that's sort of the songs, well, you can describe the songs that are more about sort of change and moving forward. Well,
there are a few more Bushisms just for comic relief. And then there's the Arab Spring slogans. The first is, the people want to bring down the regime, which is a very positive slogan. And then the second one, which is not as positive, is we had a spring too. So basically, all these Arab countries had a spring, and they didn't do so well. So, it was sort of the answer back, right?
Yeah, and there's also the Winter Soldier's Investigation, which is my favorite song, which is a speech John Kerry gave when he came back from the Vietnam War, which has very, very ominous echoes.
Yeah, how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam?
Yeah, and I think it was sort of poignant when he was running in 2004 that feeling of coming, and it's basic. So I think, and then we end with you end with Yes We Can, the iconic, and just the idea of no matter how, I feel like no matter how sort of dark and evil things can get, that there's always some sort of hope for change, and that people, I think it's better to end that way than with a sort of sense of despair.
Right. Well, and I remember that was like the big sticking point for us, because the question was, do we end with Obama's announcement of bin Laden's death, or do we end with yes we can?
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, well, do we end with this really, a celebration of a death?
Yeah, and you can't...
Or do we, so...
Yeah. So my next point, I think we kind of covered a lot of the text, so we'll move on from that. I think it's always hard. I talked a little bit about this with Libby. Setting prose is a difficult task for a composer, because it wasn't written with the purpose of being set to music, and so poetry, even if someone didn't write a poem with the explicit intention of it being set to music, there's a natural, it's in rhythm. There's the same number of beats in every line,
right,
or etc. Syllables in every line, and stuff like that. And there's just a lot of things that just make it possible to set it very easily. But prose is not like. So, what did you find? Did you find it very challenging? What were the sort of logistical challenges of setting these texts? What was the hardest text to set, just from a point of view of getting the emphasis on the right syllable and stuff like that?
One way I worked around the challenge was to use very short sections of the speeches, because it was very a lot of these political speeches are not poetic at all. They're just straightforward, and they say what they need to say. So I think the hardest one was actually John Kerry. Because there's so much information, and there was so much important information in there that I didn't want to get rid of, and then I sort of, because it's of course explaining what the Winter Soldier investigation is. That's very metaphoric. A Winter Soldier investigation is basically all the soldiers that went AWOL when things went wrong. So they say...
This is Thomas Paine said, it's a Thomas Paine quote. That, all soldiers are loyal in summertime.
Right.
And it's in wintertime when the ones who aren't loyal are going to go AWOL.
Yeah, and John Kerry was saying that he was part of the Winter Soldiers. But then again, how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? And that's, as beautiful as that quote is, it's wordy.
It's wordy. There's lots of I feel like that is a criticism that I find in a lot of people composers who do a less good job of setting prose things. Is you get these sort of awkward, one pitch with 17, the 7 how and just that chant
recit,
recit, where you just it just feels like you're just trying to fit in syllables, and it gets really annoying, or it gets. I feel like text setting is one of the most difficult things, I think, compositionally to do, because it functions like oxygen in that if you set a text exactly right with all the emphasis, the right emphasis on the right syllable, and the sort of natural speech, sort of being mimicked, you just don't notice it as a listener. It's just nothing. It's not you don't go, wow, that really works. But one weird thing,
and you notice it,
and it takes you out of the music immediately. You just can't. At least I get so bothered by it. That I can't. For the next minute of music, I'm just thinking couldn't he have solved that problem?
Actually, I probably shouldn't give this away, but in some of the Bushisms, I purposely went against the way you would say something.
Yeah.
And I did things like set text badly sometimes.
That is, it's to sort of mimic the clumsiness.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite. And we'll talk. Well, this kind of gets into sort of compositionally what you were doing with this piece. But I think the piece has, you really can call them leitmotifs, right?
Yeah.
They're short melodic tunes that represent the different themes, and what's great is they come back a lot in the song, and it connects songs in ways that you didn't really expect, and that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to figure out. But one of my favorite themes is "Drunk Hail to the Chief," which is it's the hail to the chief, but it's all in minor seconds, so it sounds inebriated. But whenever you set things to that with the words, a lot of times the words don't fit at all.
Right.
But it's clearly on purpose. It's clearly like this sort of like you want purposely the feeling of like fitting a like round peg into a square hole.
Yeah.
Like, this sort of arrogance of like you know, I'm just gonna say these words and then have to fit in the music.
Yeah.
Like, you know. But while we're on that subject, why don't we talk a little about what are the other sort of motives that you use? There's the Chopin, there's the funeral march.
Right. There's the funeral march, which comes in with How Do You Ask a Man to Be the Last Man to Die?
And I think it's in some other songs, right?
Yeah, it's in there.
It's sort of a death motif.
Right.
When you and then there's the da 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 da, the sort of, I think that's the like Iraq motive, the descending triplets.
Oh, right, yeah.
That comes in a lot.
And then there's of course the people want to bring down the regime.
Oh yeah, that comes back a couple times.
Yeah.
The sort of the martial.
Right. There's Battle Hymn of the Republic that I put in there. It's snuck in there for Yes We Can. And I think there are probably a few more because, you know, I like to use leitmotifs, especially when it's something so ingrained, like the funeral march, like Battle Hymn. You psychologically tie to something, you know, the Hail to the Chief also. Yeah. You know, you tie that, you think, okay, president, all right. You know, you think of that. And so I wanted to use some of those, and sometimes it's not even noticeable. It's just like... It's kind of in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially since you wrote it out of one of the kind of cool things is, it's sometimes a theme, like a leitmotiv is sort of introduced sort of in the background the first time it's ever heard, and then only in a later song is it kind of the main musical idea.
Well, that's because I didn't compose anything.
Yeah.
And the other leitmotif, which I cannot forget, is Quagmire. The Quagmire motif from Family Guy.
I didn't catch that one. I don't know much Family Guy.
Yeah, for those of you that like Family Guy.
But yeah, well, this is not on our list of questions, but I think we can sort of segue to it. What would you say are your musical influences? Because I think they're always interesting. Like what styles of music? I mean, I have my ideas just from playing the songs, but I feel like if I were to sum up your style, which I don't know if I'm allowed to do.
I want to hear this. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's what I sort of put in the press release was sort of, it's like Led Zeppelin meets Stravinsky.
Yeah.
Or what was the other? I'd also
Black Sabbath. There was a Black Sabbath in there.
It was Black Sabbath and Bartok. That's actually better. Whatever. I think Black Sabbath and Bartok is better than whatever I put Black Sabbath and I put Black Sabbath and some other.
Yeah. I remember there was Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath.
But I'm going to go in after this and change that to Black Sabbath and Bartok because I think that's better.
Well, they are both very big influences. I grew up listening to classic rock and heavy metal, and you know, I'm really into Beethoven, which I used to when I was a kid playing piano, I worshipped Beethoven. It was like, you know, he was the end all and be all. Even before I knew I wanted to be a composer. And my biggest influence is my teacher, Fred Ho, which I think everybody.
And he's a jazz guy. Or he's an avant-garde jazz guy.
Yeah, I was never really into jazz, quote unquote jazz. But there's something about his music, and he's a very political writer, composer, and writer and activist. And
he got in trouble in China, didn't he?
Did he?
That's what I read on this Wikipedia page.
Oh, really? He got in trouble? I didn't know that, but I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't put it past him. You know, he's really kind of out there. He writes very political works. He writes, you know, martial arts opera, which is my next big venture. But you know, I'm also into a lot of new composers, Livy Larson, Derek Bromell, you know, composers like that. Just I'm very into works that have something to say, and you know, there's not a lot of that out there.
Yeah, which leads us, I think, very nicely to our last I have some ideas in this, but what do you think, if you had to say the point, if such a thing exists, of quagmires and the known knowns is? What's the thing you're trying, what do you want the audience to come away thinking?
Well, it would be enough if they just thought about it. You know, we all live through it, and I think this work is important because of that. Just think about it. You know, think about the idea of conquering another place and how entitled one must be to think that we can do that. That's one thing, and you know, another is just, we are all human and we all make mistakes, and sometimes our mistakes affect nations and the world and everything. And you know, Saddam Hussein did really horrible things, Bush did some really horrible things, but I didn't want to vilify anybody. Well, except for maybe Bush. But I
Bush has poignant moments.
Yeah.
You know, his September 11th song, where he sort of,
right.
and it's Psalm 23, which is sort of in his voice.
Yeah.
It does, but you know, there's no doubt that he was deeply affected
right.
by September 11th and sincerely sort of wanted to do the right thing, even
right.
if he ended up doing something
right.
horrible.
At least what he thought was the right thing.
Yeah, there's no doubt, you know, I think he was sincere in his sympathy towards people who, you know, lost their lives in 9/11.
Right, yeah. You know, and I think the biggest thing is that we need to examine the way our world works, and you know, all the mistakes that we make as a people and as human beings and as a country, and the way we affect each other. I mean, that's really the biggest thing.
Yeah, I mean, I had my sort of thoughts in thinking about the title of the piece, and I find the big sort of, because there's quagmires and the known knowns, and it's sort of a dichotomy.
Right.
And I think what this whole piece to me sort of speaks is, on one hand, there's this sort of the known knowns I see as this sort of arrogance of power. People who just, you know, maybe Saddam Hussein or Donald Rumsfeld, or, you know, it's sort of anyone generically in power. And this sort of sense when those who are in power of being invincible, being immortal, and being like not having to deal with the consequences of their actions, and the quagmires being the very, very real consequences of these actions by people who power has sort of changed or dehumanized. And I think that the whole work to me is a sort of meditation on sort of the arrogance of power and actually the courage it takes to sort of question power and to stand up against power. And that's why I think the last section, you know, with the Arab Spring speeches and Yes We Can, just the whole idea of how easy it is to just sort of get drunk on power, and how difficult, you know, wintertime, so the whole idea that it's not easy to like do what's right and stand up. It's easy to be powerful and just sort of act without consequence. It's hard to sort of stand by your conscience and do the thing and try to challenge power.
Right.
And so I think that's sort of, to me, the overall sort of theme of the work.
Yeah.
Unless you strongly agree with it.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely, I mean, I was so close to the piece, and there were so many things that I was thinking that it ended up being like this wealth of, well, what do I want everybody to think? What is the main goal? And at this point, I think maybe you're right that it is about what happens when people in power do the things that they want for no other reason than that. You know?
And when we as sort of civilians in democracy let them.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I think songs like, you know, the spreading of paranoia and just the idea that, I think it's, you know, that old dumb cliche, you know, absolute power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. You know, just the idea of people who, you know, when people are given power and then are suddenly terrified for their own lives, they're going to act very stupidly. Yeah. And that is why we need a democratic process, and we need people of courage constantly making their lives hard. Yeah. Because it's not, and you see, because you kind of see it on both sides, both, you just see how it doesn't matter, skin color or like what, system of politics you have, people are always going to kind of like find ways to do bad things if they're unchecked.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yes. So, this is all to say we strongly suggest you come to Galapagos Art Space on May 21st, which is a Tuesday, at 8 p.m. to see the world premiere of Quagmires and the Known Knowns. Singing in this concert is going to be the tenor Brendan Snook, who is awesome, mezzo-soprano Kate Maroney, and bass Paul Ahn. On piano is myself, Yuri Sugiyama, and Michael Rose. It's going to be a super awesome concert. We're probably going to also have some kind of question answer.
Yeah,
there's going to be talking, and there's going to be drinking.
And probably a signature cocktail.
There'll be a signature cocktail. We should call it the WMD.
We should. Maybe we can have a couple. We'll have one called like I don't know.
We'll see what the budget.
Yes, we can.
Last time we did a concert, they let us have one drink, but I guess you didn't really. We just called it the Charles Ives.
Yeah.
This might be more conducive to more drinks. Anyways, thanks for all of you who watched the first season of Song and Wine. We might be back in the summer, but we will definitely be back in the fall for a brand new season of concerts and drinking and talking. So, till next time, I'm Mike Brofman, Artistic Director, Marie Incontrera, and thanks for watching.